Good morning, church. No uterus, no opinion. Fans of the TV show Friends will remember these as Rachel's words. This moment happened in season 8 after 3 men had casually offered commentary about her experience of pregnancy. The line was clearly written for laughs, but it highlights a legitimate concern. Men have often been willfully ignorant about women's health. Women who have shared their experiences have sometimes been disbelieved and even called hysterical by male doctors. And with history like this, it makes sense that women would cringe when a man starts offering his opinion about something as personal as pregnancy. Well, today, as you heard Lydia pray, is Sanctity of Life Sunday. This is the week every year when churches across our nation proclaim the value of unborn life and grieve the reality of abortion. Some people would say that a man has no business talking about abortion because, after all, I will never experience pregnancy. And if you are skeptical about this sermon, I get it. But if you give me a chance, I think you might just be surprised by what I have to say. You see, I believe that abortion should matter to men. On the most basic level, men should care about abortion because men are responsible for every pregnancy, whether planned or unplanned. Without men, there would be no abortions because there would be no pregnancy. I realize that speaking about things like this brings up a lot of emotions in a lot of us. And I just want to, at the front of this message this morning, tell you that if there's anything I say this morning that makes you want to talk more with me or let me know how something I said affected you, I would just invite you to seek me out after the service or even sometime later in the week. Feel free to send me an email. I want to start a conversation today that continues here at our church, and I understand that these are sensitive topics that deserve proper time, and so I want to create space for that. If you are visiting with us this morning, this is going to be a different message than we normally have here at our church. Normally we go verse by verse through the Bible. This is more of a thematic message. I believe that with their choices, men can either support a culture where life is honored or support a culture where life is seen as disposable. And I believe that when men embrace their God-given responsibilities, they can be powerful allies for women and their babies. So as we think about men and abortion this morning, we're going to look at the dark reality of men and abortion. Then we're going to talk about the difference that Jesus makes. And finally, we're going to think about what men can do to support a life-affirming culture. So let's begin by talking about our heaviest point this morning, the dark reality of men and abortion. The ancient world was not a safe place for women. Since they lacked the physical strength and social status of men, they were often treated as objects. They were used and discarded when they were no longer wanted. In Rome and in most societies throughout history, powerful men got what they wanted, and women and children paid a horrible price. Author Louise Perry describes how the dishonoring of women's bodies was connected with the discarding of babies. She says, Roman men enjoyed unrestricted sexual access to the bodies of their social inferiors, including children, and murdered infants were understood as an acceptable consequence of the need for frequent male sexual release. And murdered infants here is not an exaggeration. Archaeologists have actually discovered many infant skeletons buried at brothels. You see, if a baby kept a man from using a woman's body, the baby would often be disposed of. Infanticide was a widespread practice throughout many ancient cultures. Sometimes babies were drowned, and other times they were left out to die of exposure. We actually have a note from a Roman man to his pregnant wife, dated to the year 1 BC, where the man casually writes, "I am still in Alexandria. If you give birth, if it is a boy, let it live. If it is a girl, expose it." You see, the fate of women and their babies was often tied together. Their bodies could be used or discarded at a man's whim. You know, Christians believe that human life should be honored and protected from conception until natural death. Now, not everyone believes this. You may not believe this. But what we can't deny today is that abortion often serves the same function that infanticide served in the ancient world. It helps men preserve their sexual access to women's bodies. You know, abortion is often described as an empowering choice for women, but in many cases, abortion allows a man to maintain their power over women. Older boyfriends often pay for the abortions of their underage girls that they are abusing. Pimps often pay for abortions so the women that they are exploiting can keep making money for them. And tragically, abortion providers have often failed to report cases of suspected sexual abuse. Many people think that Christian men oppose abortion because they want to control women's bodies, but precisely the opposite is true. You see, men who want to control women's bodies tend to support abortion because abortion helps them maintain their sexual access. You see, babies are a big inconvenience for men who just want to use women. It was true back then, and sadly, it's also true today. Hugh Hefner, the founder of Playboy magazine, was a strong advocate of abortion. Playboy was actually started 20 years before Roe v. Wade in 1953, and it often ran articles over the years supporting abortion. You know, Hefner portrayed himself as an advocate for women, but his girlfriends described him as angry and controlling. You know, it should not surprise us that a man who made a fortune objectifying women was a big fan of abortion. We also have people like Harvey Weinstein, who was a vocal supporter of women's rights and who went to Planned Parenthood fundraisers, all before dozens of women came forward to accuse him of sexual harassment. You see, for men like this, supporting abortion is a way of furthering their own interests. Now, I am not saying that all men who support legal abortion want to harm women. Many men honestly believe that they are defending women's rights. But what we need to realize is that supporting abortion makes logical sense to men who want to use women for their bodies and avoid the responsibilities of parenthood. You know, about a year ago on social media, a pregnant woman shared some text messages that she reportedly exchanged with a young NBA star. So she had sent him a picture of a positive pregnancy test, which was hers, and the man apparently responded, "Get an abortion, LOL." Then the woman replied, "Honestly, I had an abortion with my son around 2 years ago, and I regret it every day." The texts that occurred after that reveal that she was continually pressured, she was paid money, and that he demanded that she share a video of her taking abortion pills. Now, while not directly admitting to sending these messages, the young star in question later posted an apology for his comments made in the heat of the moment. You know, the truth is that none of us would want our worst text messages shared with the world. But this tragic example demonstrates how many men respond when they discover that they got a woman pregnant. You see, he disregarded the wishes of the mother, he disregarded the humanity of the child, and he used his wealth and his status to pressure this woman into getting an abortion. You know, most men don't have the wealth of a sports star, but men use other ways to pressure women to get abortions. They can threaten to leave or withhold financial support. And tragically, violence against women often increases when they get pregnant. You see, choice is often used as a euphemism for abortion today, but many women who get abortions don't feel like they have a real choice. They are under tremendous economic and social pressure from men. Many pregnant women even fear for their physical safety. Brothers and sisters, this is not freedom, this is bondage. Now, this is not the case with all abortions today. Many women do freely choose to get abortions without pressure from men. You know, there are some men who never even know that they caused a pregnancy. Some men who would have embraced the responsibilities of parenthood have had that opportunity taken from them. And many men grieve the loss of a child that they never had a chance to hold. And if that is you, please know that this church grieves with you. But what we do know from history, from the present day, is that a culture that puts men's sexual desires first will dishonor the bodies of women and discard the bodies of children. But not all men have acted this way. Jesus was born into the Roman world that I just described, and he confronted this evil head on. So let's talk now about the difference that Jesus makes. In his life and through his ministry, Jesus raised the bar for men and their behavior. He called men to be different. In Matthew 19, Jesus prohibits men from discarding their wives through casual divorce. In Matthew 5, Jesus says that even a lustful look is sinful, and he implicitly in that passage condemns polygamy. Not only were men prohibited from touching a woman inappropriately, but they were not even supposed to gaze at a woman sinfully. In his letters, the Apostle Paul continues this thread from the teaching of Jesus, and he condemns all forms of sexual immorality, called porneia in the Greek. This includes all sex outside of marriage, visiting prostitutes, and men having sex with boys. All of these things, which were very common in the Roman context. And this restriction of male sexual freedom was just astounding to the rest of the population. This was incredible what Jesus was calling for here. You see, Christianity called men to be sexually self-controlled out of respect for God and respect for other people. You see, not only was sexual sin offensive to God himself, but sexual sin was also harmful to people who were made in God's image. You know, when he was asked what the greatest commandment in the Old Testament law was, Jesus replied in Mark chapter 12, verses 30 and 31. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. And the second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. You know, love for God and love for neighbor, as Jesus puts it here, are the cornerstone of Christian ethics. Roman men did not see babies, children, or slaves as their neighbors. They didn't believe that these people deserved their love and respect. But Jesus taught that all people should be loved and respected. And in teaching this, Jesus was actually echoing a long tradition from the Old Testament, where God's people were commanded to care for the widow and the orphan. You see, in the ancient world, those who were weak or those who were vulnerable were often despised. But God called his people to care for those who lacked power and who lacked status. And Jesus didn't just say these things, he actually lived them out. You see, Jesus scandalized the people around him by showing love to vulnerable people. In John chapter 4, he showed kindness to the Samaritan woman at the well who had a checkered sexual past. In Mark chapter 5, he healed and socially restored a woman who had a bleeding condition. In Luke 7, he brought a grieving widow's son back to life. And in Matthew 19, after his followers tried to get rid of some kids, he said, "Let the little children come to me and do not hinder them, for to such belongs the kingdom of heaven." You remember the parable of the Good Samaritan that Jesus tells in Luke chapter 10? Well, do you remember why Jesus told the parable of the Good Samaritan? The text says in Luke 10:29, "But he, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, 'And who is my neighbor?'" See, the whole parable of the Good Samaritan was Jesus responding to a man's question. And this man was trying to come up with an excuse why he shouldn't love particular people in his life. And like this man, we often look for reasons why we don't have to treat somebody as our neighbor. We diminish the humanity of people that we don't like. We look for loopholes so we don't have to love others like Jesus commands. And this is exactly what so many men have done throughout history. They diminished the humanity of slaves, women, and children so they wouldn't have to treat them with dignity. These men assumed that because they had the physical strength and they had the social status, they could do whatever they wanted. But brothers and sisters, Jesus said no. You know, we hear a lot of talk about the importance of bodily autonomy today. But we really should ask, where did this idea of bodily autonomy come from? Where did the idea that we need to respect and honor the bodies of others come from in the first place? You know, the truth is that this is not some naturally occurring idea or concept. I mean, you look at the animal world, and sexual violence is commonplace. And we've already established that throughout history, just men did not respect women's bodies. You see, the natural human pattern is for men to use their power to get what they wanted. And Jesus is actually the one who honored women's bodies and demanded that his followers honor women's bodies. He treated women with dignity because he loved them, and he commands his male followers to do the same. To him, women were not objects to be used for men's pleasure. They were people made in God's image who were worthy of immense respect. And as Christianity began to spread, the treatment of women began to improve. Louise Perry again writes, "Modern secular feminists, familiar only with the caricature of Puritanism presented in Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, wholly underestimate the emancipatory effect that Christianity had on women." You see, the arrival of Jesus was good news for women. And the arrival of Jesus was also good news for babies. Infanticide in Rome was finally banned in the year 374 because of the efforts of Christians. You see, the moral revolution that Jesus began lifted up both mother and child together. But today, we often struggle to honor them both. Christopher Watkin describes the tension that we now experience. He says, when Christians love the poor and oppressed, they are applauded by the left. When they love the unborn, they are hailed by the right. It is as if the biblical category of widows and orphans has been cleaved apart. The left has compassion for the widows, and the right wants to save the orphans, with the two tragically and needlessly set up against each other. The biblical ethic of love can find rest in neither camp. When we see a mother and her unborn child, and someone asks the question, "Who is my neighbor?" the only right answer is they both are. We won't love the mother well if we don't love her baby, and we won't love that baby well if we don't love her mother. Right now in our culture, we are conducting a dangerous experiment. We are trying to hold on to some of the values of Jesus while rejecting the rest of his teaching. But we do this at our own peril. You can pluck a flower from the field that sustains it, and it may look fine for a day or even a week in a vase, but soon the petals will fall. What was once beautiful will shrivel when it is removed from the soil that sustains it. See, we won't have a culture that truly respects the bodies of women if we ignore the humanity of the babies that they carry. Both are made in the image of God, and they both deserve our love, respect, and protection. This morning we have seen that men have often dishonored women and babies, but we have also seen that Jesus provides men with a different way to live. So in conclusion, I want us to think about what men can do to support a life-affirming culture. And I believe that this will be meaningful content for our sisters present here this morning as well. As a man, it's not always easy to know what to do, how to make a difference with something as big as abortion. We live in a state with very liberal abortion laws that seem unlikely to change. And most of us don't have regular contact with women who are in crisis pregnancies. So what can men do? Well, I just offer 3 suggestions in closing. First, we can have a gentle posture. Gentleness might not be something that we automatically associate with masculinity, but gentleness is a fruit of the Spirit that every single Christian is called to practice. You see, when facing a social injustice like abortion, it is easy to get angry, and that anger is understandable and justified because precious lives are being destroyed. But expressing anger in our activism can sometimes push us away from those that we most want to help. See, tragically, many daughters have chosen abortion because they feared their father's anger. So dads, boldly teach your daughters about God's good plan for sex, but they also need to know that there is nothing that they could ever do that would diminish your love for them. They need to know that if they ever get pregnant, you will love and support them and their baby. Fathers, let them know that they don't need to be afraid. In preparing this message, I encountered a study that just broke my heart. CareNet recently surveyed 1,000 women who had gotten abortions, and of those women, 70% identified as Christians. And of that same group, 43% of those 1,000 women were regularly attending church when they got their abortion. But only 7% of those women talked with anyone at their church before getting that abortion. I don't know why all of those women stayed silent. But as a pastor, I want to do everything possible in my power to make sure that my sisters here know that this is a safe place to talk about your past abortion, and a safe place to reach out when you are in an unexpected pregnancy. And sisters, if you are pregnant right now, I want you to know that you are loved. We want to help you. We want to support you. We won't judge you or make fun of you. We want to help. And I hope that we can earn your trust. You can let us help. So men, the women around you are listening to how you talk about abortion. So don't speak harshly and ruin your opportunity to show them God's love. The second thing that men can do is accept responsibility for our sexual behavior. For far too long, men have depended on women to enforce sexual boundaries. But God holds men responsible for their own sexual behavior. The Apostle Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 6:18, "Flee from sexual immorality." As we've already said this morning, the Bible defines sexual sin as any kind of sexual activity that occurs outside of marriage. You see, in consensual sex, the man and the woman bear equal responsibility for a potential pregnancy. But if pregnancy does occur, the burden falls more heavily on the woman than on the man. And for that reason, the normalization of casual sex disproportionately harms women because women are the only ones who can get pregnant. You see, when a man gets a woman pregnant, he puts her in a vulnerable situation. Brothers, it is not loving to have sex with a woman and potentially get her pregnant if you are not married to her. You see, marriage creates an environment of safety and security that dating just doesn't create. A pregnant woman deserves a husband and a father who is fully committed to supporting her and her baby for life. You see, Christian values, they nourish and they sustain each other. So you have godly sexual ethics here. Godly sexual ethics reinforce the value of unborn life. Because less premarital sex equals fewer crisis pregnancies and fewer abortions. For that reason, one of the most pro-life things that a man can ever do is refuse to have sex outside of marriage. We don't like the fact that a moment of passion can lead to a lifetime of responsibility. And I will admit, the ethics of Christianity are weighty. This is a high calling. This is a difficult standard to fulfill. The ethics of Christianity are weighty, but they are not arbitrary. You see, the Christian disapproval of premarital sex reflects the powerful reality of how God created sex. God isn't trying to keep us from having a good time. He has put boundaries in place because he loves us. Men, we can't bear the burden of pregnancy, but when we father a child, we should accept all of the responsibility of parenthood. It is a very scary thing to find out that you have become a father unexpectedly. And all sorts of things can go through your mind in that moment when that happens. But if a woman is pregnant with your child, the right response is always to say, I will do whatever is necessary to care for you and this baby. And one more thing on this point about sexual responsibility. We need to recognize that the porn industry and the abortion industry are joined at the hip. Both profit from our lack of sexual self-control, and both dishonor women and children. Every click feeds a system that dishonors human life. Brothers and sisters, let's not feed that system. Well, the final way that we can support a life-affirming culture is to speak up for women. You know, it is absolutely essential that men show gentleness and compassion to the women around them, but there's also a time for men to use their voices and resources to defend those women. God calls us as men to stand in between sinful men and the women that they would want to harm. That's a part of his calling on godly men. And there's an amazing example of this in Ruth chapter 2. You may want to look at that after the service today. And in that passage, Boaz is a wealthy landowner in Israel, and there is a young refugee widow named Ruth who shows up in his fields to gather some grain. So this situation, again, very vulnerable. Ruth is incredibly vulnerable here. She could have easily become the victim of sexual violence. But Boaz in this situation steps in to protect her. You know what he does? He commands the men of his field not to touch her. He uses his social status to protect a vulnerable woman, and we should do the same. You know, guys, all of us have different areas of influence, and God calls us to use our influence in positive ways. We can say, in my business, in my office, in my circle of friends, at my lunch table, I will not let women be mistreated by men. You see, we need to fight against the normalization of bad male behavior, and we need to stand up for our female neighbors. You know, some of you men listening here today have been blessed with incredible resources. And God calls us to use those resources to help people in vulnerable situations. So I'd encourage you to pray and ask God how he would want you to use your resources to serve women who are in crises. Perhaps you could pay for housing for an expectant mother, or provide work for a young woman who's trying to break free from an unsafe relationship. Now, we can only protect women who are willing to receive our protection. We can't force women to receive our help. But guys, God made us men for a reason. And he doesn't want us to sit by and let women be harmed on our watch. So let's not. Men may not have a uterus, but they do have a mission. And if we embrace our God-given responsibility, we can be powerful allies for women and their babies. And then, with his help, along with our sisters here, we can help build a culture where all human lives are valued. Let's pray. God, we come to you this morning and acknowledge that you are the giver of all good things, including life itself. And God, we admit that there are things that we have done that have dishonored the gift of life that you have given. But Jesus, we rejoice in the fact that you have showed us what it looks like to honor those who are vulnerable, to lift up the weak, to protect those who need protection. And God, I pray that our church would be a place that would be safe for women and their babies. God, I ask that you would give the men here today conviction to follow your plan for their sex lives so that they can honor life through that. God, I pray that you would give us the discipline that we need to show the love that you have commanded us to show to our neighbors. We ask all of these things in your holy name, Jesus. Amen.